Welcome back to the channel, guys. As many of you know, I generally do not post videos on Sundays unless it's a giveaway, but this is something that's so important. If you're an outdoorsman, there's a major cold front moving in. It's already moved through part of Oklahoma, and we're going to be seeing it here in deep East Texas soon. And if you plan on camping in the cold and using your buddy heater from last year, you're going to want to hear this. So let's get to the video. If you guys have been watching my channel very long, you know that I'm all about taking care of my equipment. And as much as these things cost, and I want to say this is the Big Buddy heater. We bought it last fall, right before deer season, and I took it to camp with me, and it worked great. I kept the box, I put it back in the little plastic wrapper that it came in, and to my surprise, when I got it out to test it, to make sure that it worked before camp. And this is where it gets interesting, guys. I noticed there was a little bit of surface rust right up here on the top, and I thought, well, that ain't no big deal. If you guys aren't familiar with the Big Buddy heater, you've actually got a place for two bottles. One on both sides of the Buddy heater. Now, as you can see, there's a bottle that was left in here. And the reason for that is, as much as these little 1 pound LP tanks cost, I've been hooking up using the filter and a buddy hose and hooking it to a 20 pound propane bottle because it just costs too much to run a big heater like this on the 1 pound bottles. Now, I know some of you buddy heater pros out there are going to say, hey Dale, you know there's actually a spot to hook up a hose over here on this side. And I'm going to follow up with, no, I didn't know that. I did know that if you use the filter and you screw it in on either side, you can still run your 20 pound bottle just like you could if it was a 1 pound bottle without using this specialty hookup hose. And that brings me to a whole nother question, and we'll get to that in a minute, but how do you filter that hose? Because the problem with running your 20 pound tanks, if you guys are unaware, the biggest problem with running that 20 pound tank, I always thought that maybe your LP in your 20 pound tank was a little bit dirty, but the more research that I've done and looked into this, it's actually not the LP in your tank that's going to cause you the problems. There's little particles of oil and or debris that are in those longer hoses that run from your LP tank to your heater. That is what ends up clogging up your internals. So when I initially got this out, like I said, I seen a little bit of surface rust over here, no big deal. And I couldn't get my pilot light to light. So I did the typical, you know, the normal routine. You pull the front of this off and you run a Q-tip down in there. And you can generally, if there's a little bit of dust, debris, something like that, you can clear it out with a Q-tip. And generally that will fix your problem as far as a pilot light problem. However, that it did. But here's what happened. So I've got it sitting on my workbench inside the wood shop. And I've got a 1 pound bottle in this side that's full of gas. This one over here is obviously empty. It's been hooked up to it since the beginning. And I did that for two reasons. Number one, I didn't know if you hooked up the 20 pound bottle, if it would somehow accidentally leak out that other side that didn't have a bottle to it. But that was my mindset and my logic behind it. Had the 20 pound bottle hooked up over here, but for testing purposes, to make sure that it worked, because I know that there's been some issues with the filters and whatever else, I hooked up a straight 1 pound bottle, because your 1 pound bottle, you're eliminating all the possibility of extra gunk getting into your pilot light. So I hook up a 1 pound bottle to this thing and I light it, and you give it that 30 seconds or whatever to get going good. But the one thing that I did notice is the gas. The one thing that I did notice was my pilot light seemed to be a little bit taller than usual. And I thought, well, yeah, I don't know if that's a big deal or not. I go ahead and I put it in the low position, and I noticed that the flame is upwards up here around the top of this instead of staying in the ceramic. And I thought, well, just give it a little bit longer and let it warm up. So I gave the ceramic plate basically a minute to warm up, and the flame had come down a little bit, but it was still pretty high. And then I thought, I don't know that I like the looks of that. Something doesn't look right. So about the time that I was reaching up and I'm going to turn this rascal off, the thing blew up. And when I say blew up, it sounded like a 22 went off inside the shop. So it was a pretty loud explosion considering it was dead quiet. But I had flames that came out the top of this, came out the bottom and the back, and even shutting it off with quick reflexes, because all this happened quickly, guys. Quick reflexes, shut this off, and there's still a big flame coming out here, and you can see there's something going on back here. This flame's gone out since I shut the deal off. So here's where the problem comes in, and this is why it's taken me a couple of weeks to give you the video. Number one, I emailed Buddy Heater immediately. I took pictures. There's some, you can't hardly tell it, guys. Oh, let me finish up what I did, because this is important, and this is part of the practice. If you guys been in the military, police officer, firefighter, any of that stuff, you know that they've constantly redundant with drilling you on things if something was to come up. That way you've already got it in your mind. Luckily for me, I had it on a 1 pound bottle. When I seen the flame was still going, I grabbed a hold of it on both sides on the outer edges with it on fire, ran outside, and I placed it in my gravel driveway. Again, the flame was still going. So I opened up the door, I unscrewed this 1 pound bottle, threw it to the side, and with me blowing on it, and you could tell at this point, once I disconnected the LP, the only thing that was smoldering still and kind of burning a little bit was some of the plastic on the inside of this thing. All right, guys, you're probably thinking, well, that sounds like a bunch of nonsense. Well, I'm just telling you, I'm not making this up, and I'm telling you this because I want you to be aware. Number one, I don't think it's Buddy Heater fault. I don't think they've got faulty equipment. Guys, I've been using their stuff for almost 2 decades now as an outdoorsman, hunting and fishing and using it in the cold weather for tents. I've got everything from the small one that I've used inside the Jeep to the bigger ones that, this is the biggest one, obviously. So I'm not blaming Buddy Heater, but what I'm going to tell you is here in deep East Texas where we live, the humidity is much higher here than it was back in Oklahoma. Back in Oklahoma, I would do the same thing. At the end of the season, I'd clean this thing up. I'd give it a good once over. I'd clean out the little pilot light hole with the Q-tip method and all that. I'd put it back in the plastic bag that it came in. And it's not a Ziploc, guys, so it can still let air in and out, but it's just folded over, just the same one that they ship them in from the factory, and then put it back in the foam in the box and then put it up in the attic. Here's what I think happened. After further inspection of this thing, aside from this little bit of surface rust, I did notice down here on this side, because this one bottle that I left in here is rusted on solid. You can't unscrew it. And I noticed that there was some problems there. A little bit of rust down here, some rust down here. This unit also has the spot where you can put in the D-cell batteries down in the bottom down here. And it's got this switch, but for whatever reason, Buddy Heaters quit putting the fans in a lot of these, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. The new green one that we bought to replace this one does have the fan in it, which I truly love, and again, they shipped out a lot of these without the fan motor in it. I'm not sure why, and that's a whole different lesson. But the biggest thing I want you guys, number one, to get out of this video is if you have a problem similar to mine, especially if you have it hooked up to the 20-pound tank, you're going to have to be able to get it in your mindset now. It's not a lost cause. Okay, so number one thing that I want you to think about, and this is kind of why I brought up the training. Guys, you're going to have a plan in place if this happens to you. I'm not an LP master and I'm not a Buddy Heater master, so I can't tell you what the best plan of action would be, but the one thing that I can tell you is you don't want this thing burning your tent to the ground, with you in it especially. So with that said, I think probably the best plan and course of action you could take is this. Number one, do just like I did. Test this thing out way before you ever take it to camp. I think that is always going to be your best opportunity to find any kind of failure Find it before you get to camp, find it before you get it set up inside your tent, and find it before you hook a 20-pound bottle up to this thing. Secondary, like I mentioned, I'm in deep East Texas, and I know the humidity is much higher here than it is back in Oklahoma. So for any of you in the South or in these humid states like where we're at, the little packets of silicone or whatever they call it, those little BBs like you see, it comes in your cereal, your rice, your boots, anything you order. Keep grabbing a hold of them. I've collected a whole bunch of them, and you can actually buy them on Amazon. But when you get ready to store this at the end of the season, put some of them, stack them up in here so that you're not getting any of that residual humidity causing you rust or any issues. I believe what happened is somehow between this main pipe and this other pipe going over here, it corroded enough that it rusted a hole and it got a leak. And again, I'm not blaming Buddy Heater. I think that could have been avoided had I put more thought into it. I just put this thing away like I've been doing for the last 2 decades back in Oklahoma. We didn't have the humidity there. I have reached out to Buddy Heater 2 or 3 weeks ago, sent them pictures of everything, sent a detailed email, and they have not got back with me. But with this cold front coming up, it's too important not to, number one, accept responsibility. I believe it's my fault for storing it in a high humidity area. I'm not blaming them, guys. And then number two, like I was saying, have a plan in place, and I think the best plan of action is to, number one, avoid something like this, because had I had this set up inside the tent, the same thing would have happened inside my tent. Avoiding it by testing your equipment before you go out in the field is always going to be better than trying to prepare for some sort of madness at camp, especially during the middle of the night or during the middle of a freezing cold storm. Have a plan in place before it happens. That way you're covered and you can get there and enjoy it. Guys, again, I'm not knocking Buddy Heater. I'm going to do a full review on our new Buddy Heater that has the fan on it. We've also got some other things in place this year that we're going to experiment with, using some of the thermo fans at camp this year. We already know going into it, it's going to be in the 30s when I get there to camp this year. And I'm going to be there for 2 weeks, so we're going to have plenty of opportunity to make some more videos. I'll be using the new Buddy Heater. And then if you guys don't know, I've always got a Buddy Heater inside my wood shop, and that's kind of how I heat my shop to keep my laser from freezing up during the winter time, is I just use these heaters. They work great. I've got a lot of faith in them. I'm just telling you, that's what happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you. Again, guys, if you like our video, give us a big thumbs up. We appreciate your likes, comments, and subscribes. And until next week's video comes out, be sure to check out one of the playlists up above. I promise you, I've made a lot of videos just for you. So again, we appreciate each and every one of you. And let's get outside and make something happen. Fireplace.